In this video, we're going to be reviewing the FN 545 Tactical. For many decades, the 1911 and the Glock 21 were kind of the standard bearer for 45 ACP carry handguns. Speaking of FNs, I had previously reviewed about 7 years ago now the FN 509, which looks similar to this but a smaller version in 9mm. And during that time, there were some refinements I thought that FN needed to make to their pistols, including the fact I really didn't like their trigger. And as a result of that, I never really warmed up to the FN 509. However, in January of 2023, that's when FN released the 510, which is the 10mm version that you see here, as well as the 545. So basically, these are almost identical pistols. Of course, one built in 10mm and one built in 45 ACP. And both of these are pretty much, if you look at them, they look a lot like the 509. So these are just larger versions of the 509 series. Now, there's a couple variants here that you can buy. Of course, the one you see on the table here is the Tactical. There's also, for example, what's called the MRD, which is a couple $100 less. And some of the changes that you're going to see here are, of course, there's no threaded barrel, etc. And of course, it comes with two 15-round magazines. Now, the tactical version over the MRD includes things like, for example, the sight shroud, which is one of the things that makes it really kind of stand out looks-wise, is this rear sight shroud that is built into the rear mounting plate. Of course, it has a threaded barrel. And it also has tritium night sights, and they're really nice. They're white outlined tritium night sights in the front as well as rear, and they're kind of more subtle on the rear, so the front stands out great. These are suppressor height sights, excellent sights that come on the Tactical. And again, one of the differences between the Tactical is you get a 15-round as well as an 18-round magazine with the gun. Now, both versions can be bought in both flat dark earth, which you see here on the 510, as well as black, which you see here on the 545, as well as both versions of the MRD as well as the Tactical also have optics cut. So basically you can put on red dots or any type of sighting system you want on here. And of course, both of the sights, even though the MRD does not come with tritium sights, are both suppressor height sights. Now, as far as the weight, looking at the gun, I just want to show a couple contrasts here real quick. First thing is, when you look at this gun empty, it comes in around 1 pound 11 ounces. And then if you're fully loaded with a 15-round magazine, it comes in at 2 pounds 10 ounces fully loaded. Now, a comparison, for example, to a Glock 21 that comes in empty at 1 pound 13 ounces and fully loaded at 2 pounds 7 ounces. So again, it's very similar in weight to a Glock 21. And then the other contrast I would put on here would be, for example, to a traditional 5-inch 1911, which comes in at 2 pounds 4 ounces empty, and then fully loaded with an 8-round magazine comes in around 2 pounds 12 ounces. So basically, the difference between a traditional 1911, for example, and the 545 is you basically double your round count with almost the exact same weight, if not a couple ounces less. So basically, that's one of the big differences between this gun as well as the 1911. Now, looking at the features of this gun a little bit in detail, the slide, first off, is a stainless steel slide with a black matte finish using a ferritic nitrocarburizing process. Now, that's a mouthful. Now, of course, that's on the black version. On the flat dark earth version, they use a Cerakoting type finish. Both of them include front and back slide serrations, as well as steel tritium, as I talked about, 3-dot suppressor type night sights. There's also optic cuts, as well as the rear shroud, as I talked about earlier on the slide. It is a striker fired pistol. And the other thing that you're going to notice here is it is using a hammer forged 4.7-inch barrel threaded with a polished feed ramp. So the quality, if you're used to FNs or fired them before, you know the quality of FNs are really, really good. Now, looking at the frame, of course, this is a black polymer type frame. It has a 1913 rail system. The serialization is at the bottom of the rail mount. It is true ambi controls, so you not only have your slide catch and release on both sides, but you also have your magazine release operates on both sides as well. So it's a true ambi handgun. So if you're a lefty, for example, you might really like this for that reason alone. It also has a nice undercutting for the trigger guard around the grip. And then Takedown is a traditional flip down lever that you would see, for example, on an FN. FN also uses a hinged trigger system, which is a little bit different than what you've seen on maybe other guns before. You can tell my gun's empty here. The pull weight on this trigger, in my layman's gauge, comes in around 3 pounds, 8 ounces. So, and it's really nice, really crisp with an excellent reset. This is one of the biggest improvements, in my opinion, that FN's made over the years to their series of handguns, is these triggers have gotten much better. And then the hinge trigger system, of course, is just either you like it or you don't, but it works really well. And it has that safety on there where you have to pull down in here, otherwise the trigger will not pull. The frame also comes with 3 backstrap options. Most of them come in the box with a medium with a lanyard hole loop. You can see this here as well on here. Again, I have average size hands, so the medium works just perfectly for me. Fits my hand really well. And then of course it has a 1911 style grip angle that for natural pointing, which is again something that I really like. Now the one thing you're going to notice about these is it does not include, at least at the time of filming, a manual safety option as well, which again I think is something that FN should offer in their handguns, and I'll talk about that in a moment. So as I mentioned before, the Tactical comes with 2 magazines. It comes with a 15 round as well as an 18 round magazine. Now, if you watch my previous videos, you'll know that I always talk about if you buy a handgun, you should have at least 5 magazines for every handgun. And these are not cheap. These are not cheap magazines, and they're also really good quality though. But just keep in mind, if you're buying an FN, you're going to need to buy 3 additional magazines, and these can cost anywhere from $50 to $65 depending upon where you buy them. So just keep that in mind when you're buying this. The other thing that I think is missing on the 545 at the time of filming is the smallest magazine they have is the 15 round magazine, and as you can see, it protrudes down from the bottom compared to, for example, the 510 that has a flush magazine, and this is to get 15 rounds in here. And if you've ever carried a gun, you'll know that your printing usually happens off of your grip. So I think one of the improvements that FN can make on here is if they started selling a flush mount magazine similar to what they have on the 510, which would allow you to carry that and print a lot less on the handgun. So again, these are, like I mentioned before, these are identical in size. So that's why I was able to swap this out. But really, this should be something that they should offer as well. It'll probably drop the round count down to 13 rounds. But there's a lot of people like me that would like to, carry this handgun without a lot less printing and are willing to give up a couple rounds in the process of doing that, as opposed to having a longer magazine sticking down at the bottom. So again, that's one improvement I would recommend to FN. Now, as far as the takedown of the gun, again, it's very similar to a striker fire type handgun. Again, we're empty on here. You've got to switch down. And again, very similar to the internals that you would see, for example, like on a Glock or typical striker fires. Of course, you got the fire pin safety right there, etc. You've got the dual capture recoil spring, which again is noticeably smaller, for example, than you would see on like a Glock, but they work really well on the FNs. But the takedown cleaning is very similar. Of course, with a tactical, you need to unscrew the cap in order to pull the barrel back out of the gun. But again, it cleans very similar to any other striker fire that you've had before. And again, the internals of this are really good. The other thing you're going to notice when you take this down is how really well built the slide is on here and how beefy and strong it is. So that's one of the things I really like about the FNs as well. So then all you have to do is close it back up, typical striker fire, and it's ready to go. Now, just a couple of comparisons. If you're for example, a 1911 person, maybe you want to see these side by side. Again, you can see that, notice the difference here. Again, it's a little bit wider, for example, than a traditional 1911. As well as the height is about the same without the extended magazine. So you can kind of see that here side by side. So again, they're pretty similar in size. The width, of course, is a little bit higher, but then at the same time, you're also doubling the capacity you're carrying with almost the exact same weight. And that's, again, one of the differences between the 1911, etc. Now, things that set this gun apart. The first thing are the looks. if you've ever seen one of these in a case, a 510 or 545, they just stand out. They're beautiful handguns. The contours of them, everything about them really, really stands out. I really like them. The grip it feels incredible, especially for shooting heavy loads. And as you've probably seen in my 510 review as well, I can shoot any rounds out of this. And really, one of the things that historically I haven't really liked blocky grips on a lot of these double stack striker fires pistols, but for some reason the way they designed this here, it just fits perfectly in my hand. And I have an average size hand, and I just have absolutely no discomfort with this, either firing two-handed or one-handed, single-handed. It just fits my hand perfectly. And that's one of the things about this, as well as the texturing on the grip, etc. They really, really did this right. It is 100% reliable with all the ammo types I've ever put through this. Now, that's not saying a lot with 45 ACPs, because 45 ACPs are notoriously reliable because the tolerances tend to be a little bit lower. But even on the 510, which shoots very finicky rounds like 10 millimeters, again, I've had zero reliability issues. So again, this fires everything that I put through on this. The other thing about this is it has the threaded barrel, as I mentioned before, which allows you to take suppressors. A 45 ACP is a perfect platform for firing suppressed rounds out of. The threaded barrel is a 578 by 28 thread barrel, and it's the same size as on the 10 millimeter. And what this allows me to do is to shoot, for example, my rugged Obsidian off of this, which again, I showed you at the beginning of the video how that looks coming out of here. But again, it's 100% reliable. And the other nice thing about 45 ACP is the 230 gram round is naturally subsonic. So most of the rounds you're going to buy for a 45 ACP, especially around the traditional 230 grains, are always going to be subsonic type rounds, which again is one of the great things about this gun in shooting suppressors. And then the other final thing is, if you don't want to shoot suppressor out of here, you can add things like compensators. Again, compensators will thread on again at 578 by 28 threads, etc. Maybe you want to do some recoil mitigation or make it look a little bit different on the front, whatever. You have the ability to do things other than just running suppressors off of here. You can run these compensators as well. So overall observations, this gun is typically around $200 to $400 than a Glock 21, but you also get a lot more and better features and better quality. This gun here, I paid around $900. It was on sale new, similar to what I paid for my 510. To me, for example, when you look at that comparison, for example, to mid-grade to high-grade 1911s, you're pretty much on par with a mid to high-grade 1911 now as well. In fact, many of the 1911s can go to $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 depending upon how much quality you have there. Again, this is pretty reasonable at the price that it's at. Again, it costs more than a traditional Glock that you would see a Glock 21, but to me, it's a better handgun, and that's what you're paying for. Things I would like to see on here. As I mentioned before, at the time of filming, there's no manual safety on any of the FN line of handguns. I think it's a mistake for FN. There is a number of people that will carry striker-fired handguns and not carry them with a round in the chamber unless they have a manual safety on them. Whether they admit it or not, I see this all the time. So the reality is, if FN wanted to sell more of these, it's a nice feature to add here. And again, you've got the room for it. And you can make something like, for example, SIG did with the 365. Make just a smaller, unobtrusive safety on here that again would add a lot of value, and you're going to have more people that are going to buy these and want to carry them simply because you added that as a function. So I think that should be an added feature they put onto this line for people who want to do that. As I mentioned before, I love the feel of holding and shooting this gun. This is one of these guns you can leave in your hands for a half an hour to an hour, and it just feels so comfortable to fire it and to hold it. It requires no modifications out of the box. That's very important to me, especially at this price range. If you're spending this kind of money on a handgun, you should be able to get something that is top-notch right out of the box, which is exactly what you have here. There are no modifications needed to this gun to make it better, in my opinion. A 45 ACP is a great woods carry gun in addition to other types of things. I'm going to talk about that in a moment. It's a more versatile round than I think people give it credit for. Another thing I would like to see on here would be, for example, the flesh fit magazine for the 545. And again, if FN's watching, this would be one of the easiest ads that you can put here that would give more value to people who want to carry this gun. So, and the final thing I would just mention again between a traditional 1911 is what do you gain out of this compared to a 1911? You get double the capacity for about the same weight. And a similar size, it's a little bit wider, but again, the weight is about the same. So there's a lot of quality in this gun, but it's worth it. Now, the final thing I want to talk about is, again, the 45 ACP. If you watch my previous videos, you know that I talk about all pistol calibers are underpowered. So this whole notion that there's some great magical, handgun round out there and others, there's not. They're all different. They all have their own utility and use. Currently, at the time of filming, the 45 ACP costs about double the cost of a 9mm to shoot. So one of the drawbacks, for example, with getting a 45 ACP is it's going to cost you twice as much in ammo, at least currently, to fire at 45 ACP rounds and train and do the other things than it would a 9mm. So that's one of the drawbacks with it. But what I do like about the 45 ACP is the 45 ACP and all round types are highly effective. Now, I contrast that, for example, with 9mm rounds. There's been a lot of technology advances with 9mm where people say, hey, they're just as good, for example, as a 45 now. Well, yes and no. The 9mm hollow point rounds, yes, they've gotten a lot better, but they don't always expand the same. They don't hollow point and do the same type of controlled damage, especially in different types of media. So it's always kind of a hit or miss. But with the 45 ACP, you're making a larger hole going in, and you don't have to worry about whether it expands or not, because the knockdown power of a 230 grain round is really, really good with the 45. And that's one of the benefits with this is I can shoot any round of 45 ACP, and I don't feel like I need to have multiple rounds in target to drop them. A 45 correctly hit will do far more damage than for example, a 9mm full metal jacket or a hollow point that just didn't expand when it went into the target or the media. So that's one of the reasons why I personally prefer the 45 ACP as a defensive round in those situations where I have a choice, where I can carry a 45 ACP, etc. The other thing I would mention is that a lot of people I've talked to indicate that most people don't die, or for example, from getting shot by a handgun from the initial shock of getting shot. It comes from blood loss trauma. And blood loss trauma basically means how big of a hole are you making into the target and how much blood can come out of that target as fast as possible to bleed it out and to kill it. And again, that's one of the benefits of the 45 ACP is you don't have to worry about the hole that's coming in there. It's a much bigger hole than, for example, even a 9mm that would expand once it gets inside the target. In this case, you're putting a large hole in, causing a lot of blood loss trauma onto the target. So again, those are just some of the rationalizations I have. The final thing I would add is, and you'll notice I have a 10mm on this table as well. This is a really good gun for dangerous game as well, if you carry the right ammo in here. Now, for example, the Underwood 55 grain hard cast load, which you see here with the red tip on it, this is what I carry in the wooded areas, and I feel just as comfortable and just as protected with this load as I do with a 10mm load. This load hits like a freight train, and it also doesn't over penetrate, and that's one of the things I really like about this 45 ACP load. And again, I can fire this suppressed if I need to, but again, there's a lot of advantages, and there's people out there that carry these in the backcountry and dangerous game country, and they do carry these loads like this 255 grain hardcast load, and they're just as comfortable with that as they are 10mm into targets and protection. So the 545 is actually really good. It serves a multiple purpose, both for two-legged as well as four-legged predators. And again, I would carry this just as equal as I would by a 10mm for that reason alone. And then the final thing, as I mentioned before, if you like shooting suppressed, the 45 ACP is the perfect round to be shooting out, and this is a perfect platform for it. It's already ready to go and accurately fire suppressor rounds out of a 45 ACP. So overall, I really have warmed up to the FNs, especially the 510 and 545 since they've come out. These are excellent handguns. The build quality and finish, reliability, everything is there. Yes, it's a little bit more expensive than you're going to find with other striker fired options that are on the market today, but as I mentioned before, a lot of the quality and differences in here are significantly better, for example, than the other ones that I've talked about and mentioned previously in the video. These are just a little bit step above. They're going to hold their value a lot better, and they're just, in my opinion, they're better, more refined handguns, and as a result, you pay a little bit more for that, but you also get a much better better handgun. And to me, next to the 1911, this really is my favorite 45 that I shoot now. So that's a review of the FN 545. If you like this channel or like this video, please subscribe on YouTube, and thanks for watching.